In the quiet town of Cedarville, life moved slowly, almost like time forgot it. Tucked into a modest apartment complex on the edge of town, 22-year-old Kayla Monroe was trying to piece her life back together. After fleeing a toxic relationship with Ava's father, she was finally starting to breathe again. Her daughter, 2-year-old Ava, was her entire world, a bubbly little girl with curly hair, wide eyes, and a laugh that could soften even the hardest of hearts. Though young and struggling, Kayla was determined to give Ava a better life than she had known herself. Kayla had just started a new job at a local diner. The hours were long, and the pay was barely enough to make ends meet. But it gave her hope. Each night she returned home exhausted, but seeing Ava run to her with open arms made it all worth it. It wasn't easy being a single mom, but Kayla was used to challenges. She had no close family around, and most of her friends had slowly faded away after Ava was born. The isolation was heavy, but she carried it with silent strength. Everything began to change when she met Tyler Reed at a friend's house party. He was only 16, but Kayla didn't ask too many questions. She thought he looked older, more mature, and he spoke with confidence. Tyler was tall, had a rebellious charm, and made Kayla feel noticed in a way no one had in a long time. He complimented her, listened to her stories, and told her she was beautiful. Kayla, lonely and desperate for connection, allowed herself to be swept up in it. They started seeing each other more often, sneaking moments between her shifts and his free time. Within weeks, Tyler was staying over at her apartment regularly. He played with Ava, brought groceries, and offered to help. While Kayla worked, she was hesitant at first, knowing how fragile her daughter was. But Tyler was persuasive. He told her he wanted to be part of their little family, that Ava reminded him of his baby sister. Kayla wanted to believe it. Soon, Tyler officially moved. And the apartment grew smaller with his presence. His clothes in the closet, his shoes by the door, his voice echoing through their once quiet space. Kayla didn't notice the way Ava started shrinking back when Tyler entered the room. She didn't question the tantrums that followed each time she left them alone. She thought it was just part of the terrible twos. She wanted this to work so badly that she ignored the subtle shifts in Ava's behavior. Neighbors occasionally heard arguments, sometimes loud banging late at night. A few even saw Ava with small bruises on her arms or legs. But they shrugged it off. Children fall, and relationships have rough patches. No one could have guessed what was truly happening behind those closed doors. Cedarville was the kind of town where people minded their own business, where monsters didn't live next door. Until one day, it became painfully clear that Ava's bright spirit began to dim slowly, almost invisibly, like a candle losing its flame. What once was a cheerful, giggling toddler turned into a quiet, anxious little girl. Her laughter, which used to fill the small apartment, became rare. She flinched at loud sounds and often stared off into the distance, hugging her stuffed bunny tightly. Something had changed, but no one seemed to notice, or at least, no one wanted to believe it. At daycare, her teachers started observing subtle but troubling signs. Ava had always been friendly and affectionate, but now she avoided eye contact, didn't want to play with the other kids, and cried uncontrollably when it was time to go home. The bruises on her body became more frequent. Sometimes they were on her arms, sometimes on her legs or back. A teacher once noticed what looked like a bite mark near her shoulder. When she asked Kayla about it, Kayla laughed it off, saying Ava must have fallen or maybe even bumped into furniture. The explanation didn't sit right, but there was no solid proof to suggest anything darker was going on. Tyler had slowly taken over more responsibility for Ava as Kayla's work hours increased. She had started picking up extra shifts to cover rent and bills, often working late into the night. This meant Tyler was left alone with Ava for hours at a time. Kayla saw it as a blessing. Someone she trusted was watching her daughter. It allowed her to work, to rest, and to believe her little family was functioning. But Tyler was not who he pretended to be. He had a long history of anger issues, disciplinary problems, and violent outbursts at school. He had been expelled from 2 high schools and had no real structure in his life. At home, he was known for getting into fights with his stepfather, and his mother had all but given up on trying to control him. Now, with Ava, he had complete authority and no one watching. The abuse started small, yelling when she cried, grabbing her too hard, locking her in her room when she refused to eat. Then it escalated. Tyler began using physical punishment to discipline her. He bit her when she screamed, pinched her when she refused to sleep, and hit her if she wet the bed. In his twisted mind, he believed he was teaching her how to behave. Ava, just a baby, didn't understand why the person who once smiled at her was now hurting her. Kayla saw some of the bruises, but she convinced herself they were nothing. She was tired, overwhelmed, and desperate to keep Tyler around. She thought admitting something was wrong might destroy everything she'd worked to build. So she looked the other way, told herself it would get better, and ignored Ava's fearful eyes that silently pleaded for help. Outside, the world continued as normal. People went to work, children played, and no one saw the storm brewing behind the closed doors of that quiet little apartment. It was a cold November morning when everything finally unraveled. The sun had barely risen when a frantic 911 call came in from Kayla Monroe's apartment. Her voice was panicked, nearly unintelligible, as she cried for help. Emergency responders were dispatched immediately. Within minutes, flashing lights lit up the small complex, waking neighbors who peeked out their windows with confusion and concern. Paramedics entered the apartment and found a scene that would haunt them forever. 2-year-old Ava lay motionless on the living room floor, her body bruised and battered, her skin pale and cool to the touch. Her clothes were torn, and her tiny limbs were stiff. Deep bite marks covered her back, arms, and even her face. Some wounds were bleeding, while others had scabbed over, signs that this hadn't been a one-time incident. The horror on the medics' faces said it all. This wasn't an accident. Kayla stood nearby, sobbing uncontrollably, insisting that Ava had fallen down the stairs. But the apartment had no staircase. It was a single-level unit. When asked again, she changed her story, saying Ava had slipped in the bathroom and hit her head. The inconsistencies immediately raised suspicions. Detectives arrived shortly after and began their initial assessment. The living room was cluttered, with overturned furniture and signs of a struggle. In the kitchen, a child's cup was shattered on the floor. There were bloodstains on the carpet, and the walls bore small dents, as if something, or someone, had been thrown against them. Kayla was taken in for questioning, still claiming it was all a tragic accident. But her demeanor shifted from sorrowful to defensive when asked about Tyler. She told officers he had been watching Ava while she got ready for work, but when she came out of the bedroom, Ava was already unconscious. When asked where Tyler was, she hesitated before admitting he had left the apartment before she called 911. A citywide alert was issued. Tyler was now the primary suspect in what was being investigated as a homicide. Officers began combing through the area, searching parks, abandoned buildings, and neighborhoods where he had friends or family. His phone was turned off, and he hadn't returned home. While the search continued, Ava's body was transported for an autopsy. The results were shocking. The medical examiner confirmed Ava had endured prolonged abuse. Her ribs were fractured, her organs bruised, and the bite marks were so severe they had punctured skin deeply. Some injuries were over a week old. The examiner concluded Ava's death was not from a fall or accidental trauma. It was the result of repeated blunt force and bite-related injuries. News of the toddler's death spread quickly through Cedarville. Parents held their children tighter, horrified by what had happened in their own community. A small memorial of stuffed animals and candles began to form outside the apartment complex. No one could understand how something so monstrous had been hidden in plain sight. But the most chilling question still hung in the air. Where was Tyler Reed? And what exactly had happened inside that apartment in the hours before Ava died? For nearly 24 hours, Tyler Reed was nowhere to be found. Police worked around the clock, scouring every part of Cedarville. His face was plastered on local news stations, and his photos circulated across social media. Tips began to pour in from people claiming to have seen him walking near gas stations, lurking behind stores, or hiding in alleyways, but none of them led to anything concrete. The entire town was on edge, and for good reason. Everyone now knew a violent child killer was on the loose. Late the next evening, a break finally came. An officer spotted movement near an abandoned tool shed on the outskirts of town, not far from a wooded area where teenagers sometimes hung out. As backup arrived, they cautiously approached the structure. Inside, crouched in the corner beneath a moldy tarp, was Tyler. He was dirty, shivering, and silent. His hands were scraped and bruised, and his sweatshirt was stained with what appeared to be dried blood. He didn't resist when they arrested him. He barely spoke a word as he was transported to the police station. But what stood out most was his complete lack of emotion. There were no tears, no signs of fear, just a cold, blank stare. During interrogation, detectives tried to piece together the hours leading up to Ava's death. Tyler initially denied everything, saying Ava had hurt herself and that he tried to help her. But as evidence mounted, bite mark analysis, fingerprint matches on objects used to hit her, and Kayla's own statements, his story began to shift. Eventually, in a chilling moment that made the detectives stop cold, Tyler admitted he had bitten Ava to keep her quiet. He said she wouldn't stop crying, that she was annoying, that he lost control. The words were mechanical, as if he didn't fully grasp the horror of what he was confessing to. There was no remorse, no apology, just flat explanations. Investigators couldn't understand how someone so young could commit such a brutal act. But the more they dug into Tyler's past, the more disturbing the picture became. School records showed years of behavioral issues, violent outbursts, threats against teachers, cruelty to animals. He had been in counseling briefly but never completed any sessions. At home, there were reports of domestic abuse between his mother and her boyfriend, and Tyler had been removed from the household more than once. Still, none of that could excuse what had happened. The forensic evidence painted a horrifying timeline. Ava had suffered multiple injuries over a period of weeks. Some wounds had partially healed, others were fresh. Experts confirmed that many of the bite marks were consistent with Tyler's dental pattern, and they weren't superficial. They had broken through skin and muscle. She had been tortured before she died. Public outrage grew by the day. People demanded justice, not only for Ava, but also for the failure of the system that allowed someone like Tyler to live unsupervised with a toddler. The case became national news, with reporters swarming Cedarville. But amid all the noise, one thing remained heartbreakingly clear. Ava Monroe had suffered in silence, and no one had stopped it in time. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Tyler Reed's trial. Reporters, concerned parents, and grieving strangers filled every bench, all of them drawn by the horrific details of Ava Monroe's death. Her tiny face had become a symbol of failure of a mother, of a system, and of a town that never asked enough questions. Despite being just 16, Tyler was charged and tried as an adult. Prosecutors argued that the brutality of his actions left no room for leniency. They painted a chilling picture of a teenager without empathy, capable of monstrous acts beyond comprehension. As the trial unfolded, the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic specialists testified about the dozens of bite marks found on Ava's body, each one consistent with Tyler's dental impressions. Photos of her injuries were displayed to the jury, bruises, cuts, and broken bones, each image more horrifying than the last. The autopsy report confirmed what everyone feared. Ava hadn't died quickly. She had endured prolonged suffering, much of it in silence. The prosecution revealed Tyler's history of violence, including school records and past behavioral incidents. Though some experts tried to suggest that his abusive upbringing may have played a role in his behavior, it didn't change the facts. Tyler had been left alone with a defenseless toddler and chose, repeatedly, to hurt her. Not out of panic, not out of one bad moment, but over and over again, with increasing cruelty. Kayla Monroe also faced legal consequences. While she wasn't charged with murder, she was held accountable for her negligence. Her failure to protect Ava, despite visible warning signs, led to charges of child endangerment and involuntary manslaughter. During her own trial, she broke down multiple times, sobbing as she admitted to ignoring the bruises and refusing to believe Ava was in danger. She claimed she was manipulated by Tyler, that she didn't think someone so young could be capable of such violence. But her words rang hollow. The jury didn't need long. Tyler was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though a minor, the severity of the crime stripped him of any protections his age might have granted. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read. There were no outbursts, no applause, just a heavy, painful stillness that seemed to settle over everyone. Kayla was sentenced to 12 years in prison. As she was led out in handcuffs, she looked back at the gallery, eyes full of regret. But it was far too late for forgiveness. Ava's death had changed everything. In the weeks that followed, Ava's daycare created a small memorial garden in her memory. A plaque was placed beside a newly planted tree, bearing her name and the words, "You were loved." Donations poured in from across the country. Advocacy groups pushed for stricter child protection laws, calling Ava's case a wake-up call. Cedarville would never forget what happened. And the story of a little girl who smiled through her pain became a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't strangers in the dark. They're the people invited inside.